Hello, my name is Keith Jones. I am recording this video from Nancy Hart Historical Park in Elbert County, Georgia. Nancy Hart was the foremost Revolutionary War heroine in the state of Georgia. Her name adorns plaques, markers, and highways throughout this area. Neighboring Hart County is the only county of Georgia's 159 named for a woman. It is impossible to go deeply into Georgia history without encountering the name of Nancy Hart. Nancy Morgan Hart was a first cousin to General Daniel Morgan and to frontiersman Daniel Boone. Tradition states that Nancy was 6 feet tall and a fierce woman with red hair. This park and reconstructed cabin sits on the ground believed to have been her home along the banks of Wauhatchie Creek, which lays off to the left here. In Cherokee, Wauhatchie means war woman. Tradition has long held that Cherokee named this creek after her. Naturally, this is debated by modern historians. James Mooney, an early Georgian historian who lived among the Cherokee, claims that the name predates the time that Nancy lived here. Nancy was also a spy for Colonel Elijah Clark, and she sometimes slipped into the camp of the enemies dressed as a soldier. But Nancy was most famous for the day that several Tory militiamen showed up here at her home. They insisted that she prepare a meal for them. Nancy sent her daughter to the spring for some water and gave her private instructions to fetch her father instead. Nancy had, while she was cooking, Nancy had been slipping muskets from the Tories out of the cabin to one of the children. She was spotted by the Tories, who attempted to rush her. Nancy grabbed a musket and shot one of the men. Tradition holds that Nancy was cross-eyed and that the Tories were uncertain of which one she was watching. She may have shot a second Tory or even a third, but then Benjamin Hart showed up with his neighbors, and these Tories had been part of a band that ambushed Colonel John Dooley, a local patriot. They killed Colonel Dooley. The men proposed shooting the Tories in retaliation, but Nancy protested that they had surrendered to her and were therefore her prisoners. She said that shooting was too good for them and they were to be hanged instead, which is what they proceeded to do. This reminds me of Deborah, from the only female judge from the book of Judges. Nancy didn't have the same level of official authority that Deborah did, but she asserted it nonetheless. Deborah ordered the attack on the Canaanites, and Nancy asserted her authority as captor of her prisoners, and like Deborah, the men listened to Nancy. The existence of Nancy Hart has been disputed by some historians. In an article in 1901, Dr. George Smith referred to Nancy Hart as having been a myth. This set off a firestorm in the Atlanta Constitution that raged for weeks. E. Merton Coulter, longtime chairman of the history department at the University of Georgia, dealt with this subject extensively in 1954 in the Georgia Review. In the opening, he plainly states, Nancy Hart was not a myth. There was a Nancy Hart. He then goes on to examine what can and cannot be verified about her traditions. Children in the Elbert County area are steeped in stories about the heroics of Nancy Hart. In fact, next to George Washington and Daniel Boone, Nancy Hart is likely the most well-known colonial and revolutionary figure in this part of Georgia. This is a special place to me, as I grew up about 5 miles from this spot hearing these stories. But it has an even greater significance to me personally. This cabin was reconstructed in the 1930s, the one you see behind me, and one of the students at nearby Nancy Hart Memorial School who participated in this was my father. Thank you very much for listening.